National's Corrections spokesperson Mark Mitchell is with us this morning. Mark, good morning.
Morning, Ron.
How much will this reduce crime by?
Well, I mean, it's a strong deterrent. So we've said that we're going to bring the three strikes legislation back. When you look at the numbers there, you had 10,000 offenders that got a first strike. You had about 700 that got a second strike. You had 32 that got a third strike. So when you look at the actual numbers, it's a deterrent. Of course,
but you can't put that all down to the three strikes policy. Do you think that these criminals were, when they're about to stab somebody, think, oh gosh, that three strikes policy that ACT brought in, I must...
Well, I can't speak for what sort of criminal's mind when they're about to...
But isn't that the basis of...
But the one thing I'd say, Ryan, is
your entire policy, isn't it? Well, that the criminals will stop and they will think about the consequences before they commit a crime.
So in terms of deterrence, there's a few things. Number one, the biggest deterrent is a criminal knowing that they'll be caught for their offending. That's the biggest deterrent. Number two, you need to have consequences sitting behind that offence. At the moment in this country, we've completely moved away from consequences, and that's what's driving the massive increase in violent crime that we're currently seeing in New Zealand. And the third thing is that you've got to have, with the three strikes legislation, it talks to both of those things, because an offender will look at that and say, well, I got my first strike, I want to avoid a second strike. The numbers actually support and bear that out.
Okay.
When you look at the numbers, a first strike, 10,000, it reduces to a second strike at 700 and a third strike at 32.
Okay. The consequences you've just mentioned, so how much will crime reduce by because of your policies?
We have to have consequences, because...
Yeah, but we have consequences now. You're just saying they're not strong enough.
But we don't have consequences. That's the whole point, is that...
For who?
Which
murderer who goes through the courts is getting off without a consequence?
So there's been a 45% reduction in custodial sentencing. There's been a 158% increase in electronic monitoring. There's been a 90% increase in absconding. We saw the awful situation in West Auckland a couple of months ago with an offender that was on electronic bail that was actively going around trying to kill police officers. Ended up outside the Henderson police station. Tragic situation, because he was killed and subsequently died. He was on electronic bail. He should have been in prison.
Okay.
We avoided a tragedy there.
Would your policy have stopped that particular individual from being put on electronic bail?
Well, we'd have to have a look at that case, that individual case. But what we're saying...
Well, hang on. Well, what's the point? You can't give examples and say, this is what's wrong, and then say, I don't know if my solution will fix it.
But I was responding to your question saying that in the last 5 or 6 years under this Labor government, there has been a move away from consequences. There's been a move towards putting more people out on electronic bail, which means that there's more people absconding, which has increased the risk for the public.
All right. So this is good, because the thing is, I agree with you. I think crime has gone nuts.
Yep,
and
absolutely.
People who write into our program are not stupid people. They are hard-working people who pay their taxes, who are genuinely worried about the way crime is going. So I don't doubt that. But what I want to make sure is that for those people, the promises that you are making will actually bear some fruit, so that they actually are safer. So can you tell me by how much your policy, your plans will reduce the use of electronic bail, a crime in general, violent crime that you keep going on about? How much of an impact will this have? What are your projections?
Well, so it's very hard to have to be able to project or model that. It's like you've got a Labor government that came in and said we're going to reduce our prison muster by 30%. They've been successful in getting to 20%, but they haven't been able to model and actually show or say how they're going to reach that. What we are saying, what we are saying is that we're taking public safety seriously. We're going to get on top of the gangs. We've had a 61% increase in adult gangs. By the way, Ryan, I don't want to live in a country where we've got the mongrel mob taking over one of our rural towns, and the police... but this is the problem. This is where we've come to as a country.
I know.
You've got the enormous human cost on top of the economic cost.
What you're saying will be music to the ears of people who are worried about this stuff, but I think what we also need to be mindful of is whether what you're saying will actually do anything to stop it in the future. We haven't projected.
Well, we wouldn't be doing it if we didn't believe in it, and we feel that there's got to be consequences now. The reason why we put in in place, it's capped 40% on sentencing reductions with those discounts, is we don't want rapists on home detention.
Okay.
We don't want serious violent offenders on home detention. The place for them is in prison. We want to rehabilitate them. That's why I've been very clear that we've got a big new focus and drive on prisoners that are in remand and are now, because the court system's broken, are spending most of their time
Which I genuinely hope that
we're going to deliver more rehabilitation.
But every politician from every party who has sat in your very seat has said the same thing, that rehabilitation will be a focus, and yet over many decades it hasn't.
Well, under the last National Government, we put enormous funds into rehabilitation. We got it going. Under the Labor Government, you've had a 35% reduction in delivery of rehabilitation.
Can I just put this to you? In 2021, there was a meta-analysis of 116 studies, and it found that custodial sentences don't prevent reoffending and can actually increase reoffending.
Well, there's two sides to custodial sentences. One is it's a punishment, right? So we're actually punishing people. That there needs to be consequences for people that go out and hurt other Kiwis, that don't stick to the laws that the rest of us actually stick to. The flip side of it is this: it keeps the community safe. So there's not more people being harmed or being becoming victims, because bear in mind there's been a 41% increase in victimisations in the last 5 years. The flip side of it is this: when they're in prison, let's invest in them. Let's work on basic things like numeracy and literacy. Let's look into the economy and see what jobs and opportunities are there, and be very focused on giving them the training so that they can come out and have a greater success of rejoining society.
Mark Mitchell, thank you very much for coming in this morning. Great to have you on the program. National Corrections spokesperson Mark Mitchell.